They do. And
Most recently, Venezuela did.
yeah, well, yes, and the results are, well, the results speak for themselves. I mean, I made a remark about Venezuela one time, and a young lady in the back room said, "Yeah, I'm from Venezuela, and what you're saying is true." Venezuela has become like one of the worst places in the world to live, and if you're from Venezuela, I mean, I don't mean it to you personally, but this is what I've been told.
But they nationalized all the oil companies, and Exxon and Amoco and those companies. They lost their businesses, they lost their equipment.
Lost it, I know, lost
They
it.
just had to run for their lives.
Yeah. Oh, yes, but the results are, nobody will trade with them.
So they left the fail.
They lost, yeah, nobody will trade with them, nobody will set up to invest in them, and those countries, Venezuela is going downhill. Now, I want to say this too, this to me is really, really strange. All right, I'll tell you what, you don't have to write this down. I promise you, this will not be on the test. But I have to mention it because American liberalism, now I have had more than one liberal students. American liberalism is pro-Islamic in more ways than one, and yet I wonder why. American liberalism is pro-homosexual rights. Islam is anti-homosexual, and yet liberalism takes the side of Islam regularly.
How?
American liberalism calls for birth control, for having few children, allowing abortion. Islam calls for, I've heard the average Islamic woman has 8 babies per woman. And yet American liberalism doesn't say a word against it. American liberalism claims to be pro-woman's rights. Islam has actually been accused of mutilating women to make sure they don't ever cheat on their husbands. And America. Okay.
I think you mean the country, not the religion.
I can't understand your question.
No, it's not a question.
Oh.
The countries okay, so it used to be one way, but
Yes.
the countries then have their own cultures,
Yeah.
and they made a simple thing into all this twisted stuff. So what you were saying is basically
Stuff that's been
it's kind
twisted.
of like, yeah, it's kind of saying wrong, but at the same time I can't, because a lot of the countries, they do try to control their women. They don't give as much freedom to their women. That's true. I'm not gonna argue with that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's their culture. It's that country who wants to do that, but ended up looking at the whole Muslim community, but it's more like the country.
I understand. Okay, individual countries.
Right.
Yeah. But somehow or another, American liberalism will side with Islam in spite of the suppression of women, even though they claim to be pro-women's rights. Yes.
So when you say that American liberalism sides, are they siding with the countries or the religion? Because like he said,
It's
the
difficult to tell. I mean, there's the American liberalism seems to teach one thing, and yet call for an extreme. I don't know what word to use. Tolerance for, or liking to, or.
I mean,
Really, it's if you're confused, the whole situation is confusing.
okay, but in all honesty, every religion does that. So I mean,
Well, you can say that if you wish.
I'm just trying to figure out if you're saying that the American liberalism agree with the countries, or if they agree with the religion.
That's the same point I think of.
I'll give you an example.
Okay, a little bit of both.
The Clinton Foundation,
Yes.
they had the Clinton Global Initiative.
Yeah.
Now, Hillary Clinton is allegedly pro-woman.
Yes.
However, the Clinton Global Initiative took tens of millions of dollars from these countries that are suppressing women's rights. So what they say in public about we're for women's rights isn't evidenced by where they're getting their payments from. That's the point I think he's trying
In
to make.
other words, it's both country and religion and a mixture of both.
What they say is different than what they do.
Okay. I've already mentioned that American liberalism is hard against any kind of Christian expression in public schools to the point where the Bibles are not even allowed, and yet the Quran is.
Quran
Okay. And also there are prayer rooms, Muslim prayer rooms found in a lot of public schools in this country. And I mentioned that in the last class, the liberals never utter a word of protest. And folk, if you don't believe it, do like one of my former pupils did, who my wife met, look it up. And just look up Muslim prayer rooms, public schools, and there are many articles about them. It's there, it's in the records. Now, another thing, and this is really something about liberalism. Liberalism claims to allow freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and dissent. Yeah, is right. They threatened to kill 2 U.S. senators over the weekend who voted the way they didn't like. A couple of liberals. Now, I'm going to say, oh, that's not all liberals. No, but the left is getting harsher and harsher in its treatment lately. Again, and yet they have a toleration for a religion here that allows very, very little room for dissent. So in other words, the point I'm trying to make, folk, is that somehow or another seems to be an affinity for the American left with Islam that is really, really hard to understand in view of what Islam believes in theory and practice. In theory and practice, Islam seems to believe in everything that liberalism is against. Or you might say that everything that liberalism is for, the Muslims are against, but both ways. And yet, the two sides supposedly have a real tolerance for each other. Now, I want to remind you of something. Just a couple of generations ago, Europe killed most of its Jews. The Jews were really highly productive, but they were accused of being inferior and need to be eliminated because they were inferior. Today, Europe is allowing Muslims in. The Muslims do not assimilate very well. The Jews tried hard to assimilate, the Muslims don't. The results are going to speak for themselves in the generations ahead, maybe even in a few weeks ahead. All right. Now, what are some of the practical results of Islam? All right. Number one. Initially, now this I do want you to write down, their culture was ahead of the West. They had better medicine, and if you look at the stars at night in the sky, a lot of these stars have Muslim names, Arabic names, because the Arabs were excellent astronomers. Why is this important? Because the science of astronomy wound up leading the way when there was a scientific breakthrough in Europe in the beginning in the 1500s. It was astronomy that led the way, followed by the science of medicine. Islam was far ahead of Europe in all these sciences. Muhammad actually taught, and you can document it, that Allah favors people who learn and encourages his people to learn. But they fell behind. What went wrong? All right, folks, this is something that happens to a lot of religions. Well, for one thing, the Turks came in. I mentioned the Turks came in from Central Asia, and they put up such a strict interpretation of the Quran that it made any kind of dissent impossible. This was not the fault of the Arabs so much. But, the other thing that went wrong is their religion began to conflict with science. And this is a problem that Christianity still has. Now, I want to elaborate on that a little bit. Where did Islam conflict with science? Now, in some of these issues, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take the side of the Quran. The Quran says that man was made by God. Science says that man evolved from non-life molecules to human. I'm going to take the side of the Quran. The Quran says that the universe was created 6,000 years ago. Modern science says that the universe was formed itself billions of years ago. I'm going to take the side of the Quran. But now it becomes a little bit more difficult. it appears, now again, it appears that the Quran is saying the earth is flat. I have a hard time siding with the Quran on that issue, but I'm going to say this about the flat earth. There is a society now called the Flat Earth Society. You can watch their YouTube videos and read some of their literature. They're trying to make a convincing case, but I want to tell you folk how. All right. This is a two-dimensional ball. To us being three-dimensional people, we can see on both sides of the ball at once and through it. Supposing you had a creature here, let's say I'm going to draw a two-dimensional eye, a creature here. He could only see this much of the ball. All right, now let's transpose this to a five-dimensional universe. Supposing we're five-dimensional, had five-dimensional eyes, and looked on our own world, we could see all sides of it at once, we could see through it. Now, how many of you can follow what I just said? Okay, a few, all right. In other words, to a five-dimensional creature, our earth would appear to be flat and very open, and you can see all sides of it at once. I see a few heads, now you understand. Okay, now, the universe, more and more science starting to believe that the universe is has up to 12 dimensions, of which we cannot get to any of them. But to a multidimensional creature, our universe would appear to be flat. All right. Mohammed's also, his scientists tried to figure out the size of the moon. By today's standards, they got it wrong. They figured the moon to be only a few hundred miles across. Got it wrong. Now, something else. Ptolemy. I mentioned the Ptolemies before. They were the rulers of Egypt. Ptolemy was one of the generals in Alexander the Great's army. Well, he had a descendant who explained the universe. Now, I'm going to talk later about people who have explained the universe, but Ptolemy explained, and his explanation was to dominate scientific thought for 1,800 years. Ptolemy pictured a universe where that the earth is at the center, and all the stars go around the sun and the moon, go around the earth every day. Oh yeah, he allowed that the earth was round, a sphere, but he pictured the earth as a center. And this science, and the Islamic scientists spent hundreds of years studying the stars, and every time they discovered something that questioned Ptolemy, they just tried to explain it away. In other words, Ptolemy's universe was theirs, but it wasn't until a European scientist named Copernicus began to say, hey, the earth is not the center of the universe. The earth goes around the sun every day, and all the planets go around the sun except for the moon, and the moon goes around the earth. This idea was slow at catching on, but when it caught on, it opened up the door, the gates for the scientific revolution that Europeans experienced. Now, don't get me wrong, Copernicus was opposed, Galileo was opposed, but they weren't stopped. Now, having said that Ptolemy believed the earth was the center of the universe, I want to remind you, if maybe you haven't heard this. When I was a kid, before my time, herbal science, herbal medicine was, considered top medicine. Doctors looked for herbs that would cure ailments. Then came the medical revolution, and herbs looked on as being primitive. Now fast forward to 2018, and all of a sudden, herbal science is back with us. We go one way, reverse ourselves, and sometimes go right back where we started. Now, when you look at the sky these days with super-duper telescopes and look in every direction, who knows what appears to be the center of the universe? The earth itself, folks. This is something you won't hear very often, but it appears that all the distant galaxies are moving away from the center at a fairly constant rate. The center still appears to be the earth. You won't hear this very often now from. And also, you've heard that the earth moves every day around us, I mean, spins on its axis and goes every year around the sun. I mean, I'm not questioning that. But along came Albert Einstein in 1905 and said that all motion is relative. So when you say that you see the sun slowly moving across the sky, and you say the sun has moved since 8 o'clock this morning, actually you're correct. Because it's relative, if you follow the logic. At least everybody's paying attention, trying to figure out what I just said. But I mean, again, Einstein said that you can always think of yourself as being stationary, and any other person who's not stationary relative to you is moving. And to them, you are moving, even though to them, they are stationary. Relative motion. All right. Everybody is listening, I can see, but nobody knows how to come. I mean, Einstein actually did state that motion, that's what it's called the theory of relativity. All motion, he said, was relative. So when you say the earth is going around the sun, I mean, that's true from the sun's point of view. But if you say the sun goes around the earth, that's true from an observer on earth.
Well, that's similar to when one is riding in a car. And if you have a cup of coffee in your hand, it doesn't spill.
No.
Put on the brakes, and that coffee goes flying
Keeps going.
forward.
But something else, if you're stopped at a red light, and all of a sudden your car starts moving forward, and you hit the brakes and you can't stop it, and you hit it and you can't stop it, no, it's because you were looking at the car next to you that started to roll backwards.
Yep.
Everyone I've experienced that, I know. And you think you're moving forward because the car beside you is moving, or maybe the car beside you starts moving forward and you think you're going back, and you're going to hit the car behind you, and you hit the brake and you can't get your car to stop.
But right now, we're spinning at 25,000 miles per hour, and we don't feel it.
We don't feel it, that's
Because
true.
everybody is at
Everybody,
the same speed.
our whole
In case
world
you
is
didn't
going at the
know
same
that.
speed.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so we don't feel it.
Plus, we're not just spinning at 25,000 miles an hour. We're going around on our axis about
All right.
on the periphery of
Now.
the sun at about 8,000 miles an hour.
One thing too I want to say in the Arabs' favor, they passed a lot of the knowledge we have of the ancient world to the modern world. They did write the writings of Aristotle and passed them on to us. They wrote some of their histories of the Persian Empire and passed it on to us. So a lot of their literature, in literature, I want to emphasize this, their most famous and highest quality of literature is the stories of the Arabian Nights. All right, I can name 2 Arabian Nights stories. Let me see, one of them is about Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. And where the Alibaba fought against 40 thieves. And then there's another story, about Aladdin's Wonderful Lamp. The Lamp of Aladdin. Those are 2 of the stories that I have read. And they make for fairly high quality literature. They are capable, particularly Persians, of making really colorful rugs. They use the rugs as to worship on, as flooring for their worship, but they make very beautiful rugs. But after they conquered Constantinople, their expansion reached pretty much its upper limit, and it began to decline. Shortly after conquering Constantinople, they were driven out of Spain. Then they were driven out of much of the Balkan region, and with France's help, Greece drove them out. They were largely driven out of the Balkans, and their culture began to lag. And for hundreds of years, we did not think much of them or talk much about them until they got rich from oil. Now, again, the question becomes, why have they contributed so little in the modern times to science? And the one answer I can come up with, this word submission here, to have scientific progress develop, you have to allow this freedom to dissent. Now, if you look at the sample paper I put on my college to show you, I mean, not to show you what I believe, but this person says, I mean, he was from the Muslim world. He talked about how terrible the United States is. And he said, in the United States, the president disagrees with the Senate, and senators disagree with the president often. You know something? That is a true statement. Now, again, folks, isn't that just awful? Isn't it terrible? No, it isn't. My wife disagrees with me sometimes. And sometimes she proves to be right. Oh, yes. Yes, indeed.
I don't disagree with my wife.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
really impossible.
I wish I had one.
Well, again, I mean, hey. All right, Robert Fulton. His steamship was called Fulton's Folly. He was made fun of. He proceeded to build it anyway, and initially it broke down, and everybody on the shore laughed at him. In a few minutes he had it fixed and rolling. Colonel Drake believed that you could get oil by drilling a hole in the ground where the oil was. They called it Drake's Folly. Drake went on and drilled. Colonel Drake was not a colonel, by the way, that's just his name. He drilled, and all of a sudden oil started gushing up. And thanks to him, millions of whales have been saved. I mean, if there's not enough whales to supply all of our trains and planes and automobiles and airplanes, we get the oil from underground. Now, I want to say about underground oil, folks. I mentioned in connection with the Arabs. 50 years ago, I mean, U.S. News & World Report, among everybody else, was predicting the world will run out of oil in 50 years.
Solar power in
Now, guess what? 50 years have gone by, and we're using more oil than ever. We also discovered oil fields we didn't know existed, and we're finding out that the earth under our feet is churning out more oil faster than we're using it, and we're not about to run out. But, and I don't know how he did it. My dad talked about, he made fun of this supposed fuel shortage. No, he's just old and set in his way, but time flew by, and he proved to be right. I don't know how he knew it. Maybe it was more intuition than reality, but he believed that the oil we had would last and last and last. And I'll tell you something else about oil. If we ever run out on Earth, all we got to do is build a spaceship to go to Titan and bring that oil back here. Titan is a world of oil. Lots of it. So Titan is one of the moons of Saturn. For those of you who don't know, it contains oil that would make ours. It contains oceans of oil. And it rains oil. I mean, the oil floats in the sky, and every once in a while falls down. That's rain. Check it out for yourself. All right. Now, in the all right, we had a little bit of discussion about this just before class, but in the 800s, an Iranian mathematician created algebra.
Tell him that me and him got a fight.
What's that?
Tell him that I said me and him had problems, because I suck at algebra.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, algebra.
Yeah, we're
Now,
around.
Folk, now this invention here should have put the Arab world ahead of everybody else, because algebra is the opening door that opens up to higher mathematics. Without algebra, you cannot do trigonometry. Without algebra, you cannot do calculus.
Exactly.
You have to start. It starts with basic arithmetic.
Evil.
It starts with basic arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Then it moves on to using letters instead of numbers. And the initial shock of it for a lot of high school freshmen, that's when we were introduced to it, when I was introduced to it anyway, is tough to overcome. But it's extremely important. And again, this invention should have propelled them higher, especially now, something else. They did not invent this. I now have since learned that what I'm about to say actually came from India, but they given credit for it. It's called Arabic numerals. Western Europe was using Roman numerals. I want to ask you something. Anybody know how I did this?
Yes.
I faked it. Now, I've once thought you can't do division with Roman numerals, well, I've since learned you can. You can, but it's really, really difficult. But in this case, I faked it. I mean, you know, it's basically 3 divides into 6 and gives you a result of 2. I mean, hopefully all of you knew that already. But if you ask me how to divide 333 into 1,413 using Roman numerals, I can't do it. Now, but your average 9-year-old can do long division using Arabic numerals. Along with Arabic numerals, which we got from the Arabs, by the way, came the number 0. Yes, 0 is a number. And in fact, it turns out 0 is actually the central of all numbers. Numbers float, numbers go in both directions, 0, positive and negative, with 0 being the center. 0 is the most important number there is. Again, if any of you have any thoughts on it, your comments, your input is welcome. With these inventions that they started off with, and with what they had in astronomy, if only they could have broken through, but again, they got stopped. And the same thing we're going to learn later happened in China. China was far, far ahead of Europe at one point, but their philosophers moved in and quelched learning and convinced their emperors to get rid of your banks, get rid of your paper money. Paper money leads to greed and inflation, and banks lead to greed also. Get rid of all that, and the result was the Chinese started off and then were squelched. Without paper money and without banks, folk, you can't have automobiles, you can't have airplanes, you can't have locomotives, you can't have everybody owning their own home who wants to. You simply can't. The Arabs, though, did do one thing. They passed their knowledge on to Westerners, and Europeans learned a lot from them. Europeans learned algebra, learned to use Arabic numerals instead of Roman numerals, learned the value of the number 0, and learned a lot of astronomy from them. And thanks to the records that the Arabs kept, some Europeans began to believe that the sun does go around the earth once a year, and the earth spins on its axis every day, giving us day and night. While parts of the world are having day, other parts of the world are having night. This is something apparently Muhammad did not seem to realize. He pictured the sun going down over the edge of the earth and then going underneath Allah's throne for overnight and then coming up on the other side of the earth the next morning. All right. But anyway, their culture lagged, and a lot of it was due to the fact that they lacked the ability to disagree, lacked dissent. All right, with that, I'm going to finish the chapter on Islam and go ahead with the time I have left and begin to talk about Africa, chapter 8, which means that I might find more time next time to review for the upcoming test. The test is similar, by the way, to the first 2 you took. Woo! Very similar in form. All right, Africa. If you get nothing else out of Africa, I want you to get this. Africa figured more into the civilizing of mankind than was once thought. You know, they contributed more to civilization than was once believed. Their people, Africa has more natural resources than any other continent in the world. And what do they have? They have iron and gold, diamonds, tin, and other natural resources. More than any place else. Iron, gold, diamonds, and tin. And if Sir Lancelot existed at all, his armor and sword possibly was made from iron that came from Africa. Now, I mentioned already, and folks, let me tell you, what I'm about to say would probably have gotten me fired if I had said it in a Southern school 50 years ago. Today, it probably won't. I've said it many a time already.